Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming along. Any apologies? Got two apologies. Minutes. Before I go through the minutes, can I just welcome Will Simpson? First panel meeting. I hope you enjoy it, and be gentle with you today. Minutes of the previous meeting. Any issues? Can we show of hands and approve? Any interest? This is going live. We've got one member of the public. And can I just now pass it on to agenda item 4, Eamon and Graham. This is the Q2 financial monitoring. Eamon?
Thank you, Chair. As per recent updates, this is a more general update on financial management, Kirklees Council, incorporating the most recent Q2 monitoring report that went to Cabinet, and it also gives a bit of an update in terms of the autumn budget announcement as well, and how that might feed into some of our financial management considerations, and a bit of an update in terms of the budget process as well. And quite happy to accept questions and comments from the floor as we go along. I've actually appended the Q2 monitoring report to the covering report as well, because I thought it would be useful to have the detail. And what the covering report basically does is give a sort of a brief snapshot of what the key issues are. So I'll just summarise the key issues from my point of view, and then colleagues can ask questions or make comments as they see fit. Is that okay? Brilliant. So Q2 financial monitoring. I think the key highlight in terms of the bottom line forecast to year end, certainly on general fund, it was actually pretty consistent with the Q1 monitoring forecast, so it's been fairly steady in the intervening quarter. We're actually showing a projected overspend as at Q2 of 4.8 million on round about 290 million budget. So it hasn't moved much in net terms. There's been one or two minor changes across service areas. But the key issues that we've picked up previously at Q1, particularly around things like high needs pressure, have remained consistent as part of Q2 monitoring. We also pick up monitoring around capital and housing revenue account. The housing revenue account position has slightly improved from Q1. I think they're reflecting a slightly increased surplus position, mainly around a review of the bad debts provision. And on capital, we are reflecting 12 million forecast underspend as at Q2. But as has been said at previous scrutiny panel meetings, as part of the forthcoming budget, there is a much more fundamental review being undertaken currently by officers of the current capital plan and looking at new investment requirements as well. So the reason I'm flagging that up is because as part of that review, we will be reprofiling some of the 18-19 budget back into later years. So by the time we get to annual budget, in terms of reporting the 18-19 position on capital, we will be reflecting a lower underspend position, largely because some of the 18-19 budgets will have been moved back in light of slippage. We have said previously that one of the things we will be looking at going forward is a slight amendment to financial procedure rules to allow more flexibility to flex budgets across years while we're reporting in year, particularly around strategic priorities, given the scale of some of those projects that for various unforeseen circumstances or factors outside of the Council's control, they can actually slip between years. And it's not always easy to predict in advance exactly how the profiling will go. Collection fund position, I think it's just marginally improved from what we were showing at Q1. So we're we're anticipating an overall underspend or surplus on the account of about 0.8 million, which is quite small in the context of the overall collection fund monies that are collected in there around business rates and council tax, which I think off the top of my head is around about 250 million. So when you look at it in that context, it's a relatively small underspend on the bottom line. So I think my summary on quarter 2 monitoring was that there were no surprises really compared to quarter 1 monitoring. So all the things that we'd reflected early and captured as part of the budget strategy update report still hold in terms of ongoing pressures, particularly around high needs, but in some of the other areas as well. I suppose the only other comment is that we're still on line to deliver around about 78% of the planned savings that we set out to deliver as part of the approved 18-19 budget. I don't know if anybody's got any comments around the current monitoring position.
Questions. Here. All right. Okay. One of them was that, so with the planned savings, you've indicated areas of pressures.
Yeah.
There was an area of pressure in that wasn't included in your description. Last financial year, you were fortunate in having non-recurrent savings that may include that. And I just wondered how you were addressing that. That's my first question.
Okay.
And then the other question I had was around the impact of the reduction in business rates for small businesses in anticipation of a grant, but do we know what that impact overall is without that?
Okay. Just on the last question, can I just clarify, that's in light of the autumn budget announcement? Is that what you're referring to specifically? Okay, so on the excuse me, I've got the lurgy. So on the former question about the fact that we're delivering 78% or around about 80%, but we're obviously not delivering on 20%, plus the pressure around high needs as well, which is reflected in a net 4.8 million overspend position. In terms of what the council are looking at, in terms of bringing that overspend position down, I have said previously that earlier year forecasts tend to be quite prudent, and because there's been no net movement between quarter 1 and quarter 2, I'm still anticipating that there will start to be some movement coming by quarter 3, as some of those projections are firmed up more and services are more prepared to release maybe some underspend or additional income into the bottom line. The extent, and I said previously, the extent to which that will mitigate all of that gap, I think has yet to be seen. I think generally the position with council finances is tighter, and whereas perhaps in the past there were some, shall we say, loose ends, or there may have been some slack in the system somewhere that could mitigate some of that. I'm not sure that we can do that to the same extent, because the savings that we have put forward over the last few years means that the overall bottom line position is much tighter. We haven't got those spare pockets or that slack that we can necessarily draw on. One thing I will mention is that, as I mentioned previously, we took a decision at Annual Budget Council to review our policy around Treasury management, around the minimum revenue provision. That's the amount we set aside annually, revenue resources for our debt commitments. And already at quarter 1, as a result of that policy, we'd actually released 9 million of base budget within Treasury management, but we hadn't formally allocated it to anything at the start of the financial year, because that was part of our, I suppose, flexibility and financial resilience pot. But what happened at quarter 1 in light of the ongoing pressures on high needs is we've effectively released 5 million of that. We haven't released the balance of that yet. We are anticipating that services will continue to look at measures or means to try and bring down the overspend position, because what I'd probably want to do as a Section 151 officer, if you can get the overspend position down, then that means we're not effectively going to have to release the balance of that just to support our bottom line position, because I would probably want to take a view that it might be handier to move that into reserves going forward. And that's probably as far as I can say at the moment, other than strategic directors are actively looking at areas that they could reduce spend without obviously having, if they can help it, without having an adverse impact on residents. So we are exploring all those pockets, but I will repeat that we are usually quite prudent and pessimistic, get the bad news out early, but I'm not expecting that we'll be able to mitigate the full 4.8 million by year end. On the second point, around the autumn budget announcement, it is reflected in the next point that I'll come on to in terms of summarising that. But that's the additional relief, I think it's the third, isn't it, for small businesses with a rateable value of under 51,000. That will effectively come in from April 2019 onwards. And as with a whole range of other business reliefs, government is committed to compensating councils for the loss of business rates as a result of those additional reliefs through an extra grant. So in bottom line terms, it should be neutral for us. We'll get compensating grant matching the exact amount of relief that we actually apply in year against that specific relief.
Thank you for clarifying that last point, because I wasn't it would be match grant. I thought it might be a sort of a proportional grant.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Are we happy to go on to the...
Graham, did you want to come in?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to point out it's on page 11, item 7, that covers the business rate grants, and the government set aside £490 million for this grant.
Emmett, before you move to the next bit, can I just ask you on 1.3 on page 16, the 4.8 million overspend, could you go into a slightly bit more detail, especially the first paragraph in there? Thanks.
Sorry, which page are we?
Page 16.
Page 16.
And that's the 4.8 overspend against the budget.
Yeah. I mean, in headline terms, I mean, it does set out in quite a bit of detail in the report as to what the key factors are. But that 4.8 million is a net position. So while we're delivering around about 78-80% against planned savings, there's what it basically says is that there's the balance of savings that we haven't managed to achieve in the current year that is contributing towards that 4.8 includes continued pressures on schools transport service. So that's a significant chunk. I think a couple of budget rounds ago we put in some planned savings around schools transport, but it's quite a challenge to actually get those savings. But alongside that, there are increasing demands on pressures on that service anyway. Not exclusively around special educational needs and disabilities, but that's a contributing factor in terms of volumes and numbers, and I think more generally in terms of general demographics. So while we're trying to mitigate some of that pressure, I think there's certainly a recognition that some of its volume, it's not just cost related or around efficiencies of service or how we procure. There's definitely a volume factor, and that's something that we'll be picking up in terms of the forthcoming budget proposals. We'd already put in, as part of the budget strategy update report, we'd acknowledged some of that pressure and put in £1 million extra. Whether or not we have to review it again, that's something that we'll sort of pick up, but there are underlying volume pressures against that. So, yeah, there is a clear relationship between some of these pressures and what we are trying to mitigate through the budget round. Obviously, that then means that we're having to look at covering off those additional pressures going forward by other means as well. There's also a volume pressure on children's side around out-of-district placements coming back in. As part of the Children's Improvement Plan, there's quite a detailed work going on to have a look at that. Again, the savings that were put into the medium-term financial plan, quite challenging, but realistic. I think it was around about 3 million over 3 years, so £1 million a year. So again, that's something we picked up as part of the budget strategy update report in terms of stretching that ask across a longer time frame to give children more time to actually review and consider how they could bring some of those out-of-district placements back into the borough or make other savings to accommodate that bottom line without having a detrimental impact, of course, on those vulnerable children, because it's obviously, in terms of the whole philosophy around children's improvement, it is about putting children at the heart of everything that we do, so it has to be to the benefit of those children as well, and families and extended support. There's also a bit of a volume pressure emerging in adult service. Again, I think we picked that up as part of Q1, but it's increasing in Q2, and that's around. There's a net pressure around the impact of capacity around home care. It's a national phenomenon, but it's also a local phenomenon as well in terms of capacity of home care provision more generally. And one of the consequences, if we haven't got sufficient capacity, is that means that more and more vulnerable clients are being placed by default in residential. So there's a net impact of not being able to place as we'd like to, in terms of the disparity between what we'd like to place clients in home care and having to place them somewhere, and residential costs are higher than home care costs. So there is clearly a service recognition of that, and again, the service is working closely with partners, and it's, as I say, it's a regional, national phenomenon. You'll have heard from the national press about allied healthcare and the problems that they're facing, and that creates quite a logistical exercise as well, locally and regionally, in terms of placing some of their existing contracted clients in other contracted services to ensure continuity of delivery. So there is a phenomenon there that's more than just local. So those are probably the key factors. Again, we have factored in volume and cost pressures within adults' budget going forward as well. As we know, adults' demands are increasing anyway over time. It's just there is a national debate currently about how we fund that going forward. The forthcoming Green Paper around adults' social care may or may not to get to the bottom of that, but it's not going to. There's going to be no easy early solution to that, and I think nationally that's recognised as well. I don't know if that answers it.
No, that's fine. It's just that a number of comments have been made in the past, not towards anything, just generally. A lot of people watching this webcast as it's going live and probably afterwards, they realise the information they're given, sometimes abbreviated, or as much as we've got the details in front of us, people watching this, it's kind of for their purpose in that relation to be open and transparent as to what the process and exactly what the situation is. So carry on with the rest.
Thank you. Apologies for the coughing. Okay, so moving on in terms of where we're at in terms of the budget process, it's probably worth a bit of reflection on the recent autumn budget announcement, because there were a number of significant sums that were announced as part of that, and what does that mean for us as a council, both short term and in terms of how that might play out as part of our forthcoming budget considerations. So straight away, government reaffirmed its commitment to the 240 million nationally that it's allocated to councils for winter pressures money. The council share of that is 1.9 million in 18-19, and government have further extended that commitment to 19-20 as well. So we'll be picking that up as part of the forthcoming budget round. As with a lot of these announcements, we've got to be mindful where there are specific conditions attached to the monies, and service officers have been looking closely at what the specific conditions and flexibilities are around the winter pressures money for 2018-19, and in conjunction with health partners as well, because that's obviously part of the drive, or key part of the drive, in terms of hospital discharge, particularly through the winter months where A&E departments are under significant pressure, and government wants to avoid the issue of bed blocking. So delayed discharges can have a significant effect on the system. I think as part of the Q2 monitoring report, the detailed report at page 18, it does actually spell out what the government intends to do around the 2018 winter pressures monies. So if you have a look at page 18, section 1.16, the council sets out four broad areas where the monies is going to support the social care system. So increased funding for placements in residential care, as I said earlier, there's short-term pressures around residential care. Short stay choice and recovery beds, supporting domiciliary care providers to adopt new ways of working as part of the review of home care capacity and increasing capacity in that part of the sector, and reducing demand for domiciliary care as a result of that. And looking at new model of intermediate care and reablement earlier than planned as well, again in conjunction with health partners. So there are a number of things that are there. Effectively, some of it's covering off existing pressure that was set out in the monitoring, and some of it's sort of developmental in conjunction with health partners to reduce future demand. And I think there'll be similar conversations to be had about the specifics and detail of how we'd use the 1920 winter pressures money as well, although we will factor it in. We'll pick it up and factor it into the forthcoming budget proposals. So that was one of the key announcements. Just going back to the covering report then. Another of the key announcements was that in addition to the 240 million winter pressures money, there was a further 410 million additional grant funding for social services announced for 2019-20, which for us equates to around about 3 million. Unlike previous announcements where this kind of money has been largely or exclusively directed to adult social care, I think, again, there's a national recognition of emerging pressures on children's social care services in its broadest sense, not just adults. So there aren't the same strings attached to this. It's actually available across the social care system, so it can be applied to children's as well as adults. And again, as part of the forthcoming budget proposals, we are reviewing where it might be appropriate to allocate our share of that 3 million against the totality of children's and adult services, given the pressures in children's as well as adults, and they'll be coming forward in due course, proposals around that. I would say as well that as part of the budget strategy update report in October, we did actually anticipate some of that 3 million, because what we did say as part of that report is we acknowledge that there's been, it sounds like a contradiction, but recurrent, non-recurrent monies seems to be a key theme, that we're getting one-off monies announcements year on year on year that might be labelled as something different, but they're happening year on year on year. So we started to recognise that as part of our budget as well, in terms of an expectations of certain announcements. So there was a one-off funding stream, adult social care grant in 18-19 that came very late in the day, and we didn't manage to pick it up as part of our annual budget report, but we subsequently incorporated it into our 18-19 plan. We made an assumption as part of the budget strategy update report in October that once that funding's out there, and given the pressures on adults, we don't expect government to pull that funding back. We expect it to continue that commitment going forward, and effectively that's what they have done as part of this overall announcement. So within that 3 million, we've already factored in 1.2 million of that, so there's a balance of 1.8 million available. It's important to make that point because while it might be announced as new monies, increasingly we're already anticipating these new monies in our budget plans, just to make clear the point that actually we're using this money already. It's already committed to underpin pressures that are already in our budget. It's not something that is brand new that we can use for other projects or transformation necessarily. So it's important that we're all clear about that. because that's a change in approach, I think, in terms of how we're setting our budgets going forward.
Eamon, just a question on the one-off funding by the government. Is that the pressure that we put as a council, or is that collective LGA trying to put something, or is that kind of, is there another rationale behind it?
You mean in terms of these announcements?
Yeah.
It's difficult to say what particular factor is. I don't think there's any one particular factor, because I think government acknowledges that, as I said earlier, through the adult social care green paper, that there's an emerging, or there is a demand issue and a cost pressure that's outside the remit of specific councils to be able to manage on their own without having a significant and detrimental impact across all residents, given the scale of those pressures and the level of funding that councils are expected or are having to operate in terms of living within their means. Undoubtedly, there has been concerted lobbying and pressure. There always is on national government of any denomination. It will always happen, but certainly the LGA, Special Interest Group, Metropolitan Authorities and others, particularly have been ratcheting up around the children's services issue, about pressures, not just child protection and safeguarding, but as well high needs pressures, special educational needs and disabilities. That's now emerging, bubbling to the surface amongst a lot of authorities as an increase in pressure that you wouldn't have heard of as much about even 12 months ago. So I think it's kind of in that spirit that, with acknowledgement of these pressures, that some of these funding announcements are made as well. But obviously there's a structural issue around, I think, around social services that does need a national response, and I think that's recognised by all parties. So this is kind of, I suppose, one of a suite of interim measures to release funds until we come up with a long-term solution, and there might be more of these announcements, year-on-year announcements, maybe through this sort of current hiatus with other factors were in the minds of national government as well currently. There's limited capacity to go around to be able to nail all of these issues in one fell swoop, I think it's fair to say. So we would probably have to expect there will be recurrent, non-recurrent, one-off funding announcements for a few years to come yet. It's just the climate we're in. It's a tongue twister, is that one? I'm not going to repeat it.
James?
Just with that in mind,
yeah.
One of the things that just stuck out on you reading through this on page 17 of the second item was just around this national funding formula for high needs, which is then saying, it accepts that we need an extra 21%, but it's capped at 3%.
Yeah.
And that's the type of thing where you just look at it and say, is that sustainable? Is that the type of thing that you can factor in that the government will actually recognise that's wrong? Because it just seems strange that you set up a funding formula but then put a cap on it.
Yeah.
What's the point in having a funding formula if you're not going to look at what it tells you?
Yeah. Well, one of the key issues nationally with any funding formula review, particularly where it's more around a redistribution of existing resources as much as putting new resources into the system, and this might come to the fore as well as part of the forthcoming fair funding review for local government finance, where potentially there's going to be redistribution as well. The reason national government puts a cap on is because some authorities, as a result of resource redistribution, could be significantly impacted on straight away. Depends on there's going to be winners and losers in the system, basically. So I think the rationale for putting a cap on is so that it mitigates the immediate impact for those authorities that are going to lose most. So it kind of smooths it over a number of years, which is why we said previously, and you're quite right to point out in this report as well, that in an ideal world, the extra 7 million funding that's committed to high needs in this authority would get it all at once, but it's being released on a transitional basis through that cap because of the adverse impact elsewhere. But going back to the earlier point about lobbying and identification of the underlying pressures, I think increasingly councils are arguing that, again, there's a structural deficit with the funding that councils are increasingly finding more difficult to manage within their means. particularly given the statutory responsibilities that we've got to support those particular children as well.
John?
Yeah, thank you. Couple of things. One, just I think it's worth acknowledging the comments in the collection fund that, again, were increasing our collection performance. I think, that's really, really helpful to us as a council if we can collect council tax efficiently and continue to increase the amount of collecting. Yeah. It helps with the pressures that we're facing elsewhere. So just an acknowledgement and a recognition of the work that team are doing, really. I think that just needs bringing out a little bit. My other question is around capital. I see you smile because I always ask this question. I know that there is work, and it references it in here that there's some fundamental work going on at the moment to relook at the capital plan, because the capital plan, in my mind, and I've said this before, has always been over-ambitious, and just with my own background in terms of managing large complex programs, you never are able to deliver the size of capital spending that we've had in our plans, because we just don't have the capacity, and there are so many moving parts. It's very, very difficult to land all of those plans exactly in the timescale shown. And there's a recognition here that we're projecting an underspend, and you recognise in 1.4 that Treasury Management will manage that. The reason this is important to me is obviously if we do end up with an end point where our capital requirements are significantly less than was anticipated, that has a revenue impact as well, and that will help towards our out-term position. So it'd be interesting to know when we'd be able to try and recognise a little more what that's likely to be, and therefore what impact that will have on our overall overspend, if possible.
Okay, thanks for that. Capital standing item, corporate scrutiny panel. I did touch on it a bit earlier, before you joined us, Councillor Taylor. But you're absolutely right. We are undertaking a more fundamental review of capital requirements going forward. I think I mentioned previously that from a Treasury Management perspective, we do assume some slippage, particularly around strategic priorities, given the nature of those programmes. So those schemes that are funded by borrowing, we actually put in a slippage factor. I think it's 40%, and that's reflected in the current monitoring position as well. So although the plan might factor in for 100% spend, we already implicitly reflect some slippage in our Treasury Management assumptions. So I wouldn't anticipate that the Treasury Management forecast underspend is going to reduce much further by year end, because we kind of factored that in. The more fundamental point about being more flexible about the capital plan going forward, again, I mentioned earlier about us reviewing our financial procedure rules to allow more in-year flexibility around strategic priorities between years. And that means working more closely, I think, with our own officers as well, and being more comfortable about projecting significant underspends earlier. It's not always easy to predict how the profile of major schemes is going to pan out across years, as you'll appreciate, particularly the larger schemes. And there is an expectation that things will slip. We try and put realistic assumptions to start with, but it's just the nature of the beast, really. We will be coming back as part of the conclusion of the current budget round with a completely revamped capital plan, I think, that reflects some of those pressures. That takes in, or some of those issues, that takes into account both the stretching of the existing plan to a more realistic profile, and as a result of that, potentially there's also opportunities to have a look at other investment needs as well. Because if you're stretching the existing plan, as long as we think it's affordable, then potentially there's other investment that we could do as well. And I think investment is one of the key planks of our budget strategy, not just last year, but it's going to ratchet up again this year. and we'll see that as those plans start to emerge later on. But it will look significantly reshaped. I think I can't say it yet because it's still a work in progress, but I think I'm hoping that.
Do you want to add anything into this?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be called Prudence Audit Committee if we didn't mention capital, would it? It would have a standing item. And you're right, John, we always look a bit... I'm not over-ambitious. I don't think you can be over-ambitious. I think having targets and trying to achieve things is great. We don't always deliver them, you're right, and things slip because of some of the funding comes from external sources, sometimes planning or whatever, it takes a little bit longer. But I'm not sure it's dangerous being over-ambitious. I like to be over-ambitious. Let's stretch ourselves. Let's try to be a bit less risk-averse on that. So, you're right. We don't always deliver, but I'd rather try and just push a little bit. But when we do the fundamental review of the capital plan, which we're doing now, I think that's really reflect more what we can deliver and some of the ideas we've got going forward. So I've got some ideas, new ideas to put in the new capital plan. But you're right, we do always slip a little bit, but let's be a bit ambitious.
Yeah, just to respond to that, I agree with you about the ambition. I think for me, what has been lacking is perhaps the detailed thinking and the assumptions and the risks that are associated with that plan. And actually, if more time was spent looking at that, we can still be ambitious about what we aim to achieve, but we can be more realistic, therefore, about what is achievable, when it's achievable. I think that's the point, really, Graham. It's not about we're being over-ambitious. It's actually, are we being realistic? I mean, when I saw the capital plan last year, we were talking about spending 45 million on regeneration in 3 years. I immediately went, that's not doable. Because the nature of some of these programmes, just in initiating them and getting the planning done is going to take time. And I think that's my point. It's not about don't be ambitious. It's about let's make sure we've done the due diligence around the plan. We've looked at the risks, we've looked at the issues, we understand where the funding's coming from, whether it is borrowing or is from grants, and if it is from grants or making bids for funding, are we realistic about how long they're going to take? And we should have that experience in-house to be able to do that. And I think that's what hasn't been happening. So it's not, let's not be ambitious. It's let's do that due diligence and challenge our plans and make sure we understand the risks and the assumptions we're making associated with that, so that the plan we put in place is one that is more deliverable. And I think that's what's been at fault in the last few years. So I agree with you about ambition. It's more about the due diligence.
Hilary.
Well, my thoughts are going back a little bit, that one of the areas that seems to be growing in cost is the exclusion of children from schools, and the fact that the local authority is then having to pick up the cost of trying to educate them suitably. And the academies, to me, feel to be getting rid of their problems and dumping them on us. And are we getting any finance towards that cost, which is quite considerable if a child's been out of full-time education for more than 2 or 3 months?
Yeah, before you come into this, Graham, I had a similar question, because there's been a number of cases recently over the last 12 months where, as ward councillors, we deal with, and one of the issues which Hilary raised is you've got academies. Do they, I mean, what is the actual number throughout the council? Kids get excluded. So do we actually get compensated? Do we have any of the money coming back? And what is the cost involved? Because we then have to, the transport, the cost associated with sending a child to another school, Peru, and all the rest of it, it's huge. What is the number we're looking at? And is there any things in place, working with other cabinet members and departments, of how we can alleviate the problem?
I'm not an expert on the education system, as you well know, because it's not my portfolio, but this is a growing trend across the country. I don't think there's something on the news only this week that North Yorkshire are running into problems with their PRUs or their pupil referral units. So it seems to be a growing trend across the country. So it is something I think we need to pick up. So I think that's something we can pick up with our education department. We'll go back and have a word with them and see if there's any. If you want to come back next time, we'll do some research. I've no idea of the numbers. I don't know if it's going up or down. I don't know whether they come from academies. We do know there is a growing problem with schools excluding people across the country, but we probably need to have a look at it in our own setting, in our own context. So I'll get some to have a look into that for you.
One of the other problems is that when these children are trying to get into other schools, some of the other schools are refusing them because there are so many children being thrown out of close-by academies and therefore being virtually dumped on the schools.
I was just going to add that I think this issue has been recognised by most officers, by a lot of people. The fair access is currently going through a review, and the support that's associated with that is also all going through reviews at the moment. So it's kind of a changing picture, but one that's it's been picked up, and we do need to follow it through. Yeah.
Before I bring John in, I think the issue is one of the issues that I've come across, and along with my colleague councillors, certain schools, the council have put policies in place when it comes to CSE and all the other relevant policies, making sure. But schools, not in every single case, but in some cases, it's simply negating the responsibility. And I wouldn't go as far as saying brushing under the carpet, but it's simply passing the buck to somebody else. We've seen a recent incident where the school could have dealt with certain issues in a manner that reflects the council policy and how we do things. But passing the buck to somebody else, then it almost becomes the council responsibility, and we end up taking and picking up the pieces. And that's the issue, the costs associated with that. I know this is the corporate panel when it comes to the education that's been looked at something else, but we're looking at the finances of what is actually costing us, because we end up picking up the pieces, and there's a huge cost associated with that. John?
Two points, actually. The first one's for Graham, but it's a bit unfair, Graham, because it's not really your portfolio, but if you would take it back to your Cabinet colleagues. In the update on the autumn budget, there's talk about a national pot to help councils manage changes on local high streets. And we don't know how it's going to be allocated or whether it needs to be bid for. But I just think it would be useful if we had, and I know we're doing work on regeneration, but if we had a couple of schemes ready so that if it does come to bid for once we're ahead of the game rather than scrabbling around. So it's just, so I want to, if you wouldn't mind taking that back as a suggestion that it feels appropriate. And the other one was a question again on school transport. And it may be something that we need to take away and bring back, but and it's one that I picked up from a number of colleagues around school provision locally, and when housing developments or whether significant housing in an area and there isn't adequate school places in that particular area, are we seeing some of that pressure in school transport as a result of having to bus kids further afield because there isn't local school places? I just wonder if that's a contributing factor. And if it is, are we doing anything in planning to ensure that where we're securing educational funds, some consideration is given to whether any of that is needed to support the school transport fund?
It's not really, this education is not really our role, but we've all, as ward members, been approached by people about school places, and it's a real problem, isn't it? Because there's always whoever you are, wherever you live, you can't build in capacity, so there's always a lag. So if you build new houses, you have to wait until those children come through to put the place, because as we well know, the legislation is, if you have a place and somebody comes, you have to offer it. So good schools are always full, and that's quite right, good schools should be full, but all schools should be good. So it's always a bit difficult, and I think you're right, how we sort this out is really difficult, because people put plans in, build houses, but there is that lag then where the money goes. Excuse me. And the money from developers for education, if we're brutally honest, in the cost of building new places is a fraction. It's a drop in the ocean. So yes, it looks good on paper. They've given us X number of £1,000, but actually it doesn't buy much in education terms, because education is really expensive. As I well know, I've gone through the finances of several new schools. So you're right, John, it is a problem. And I don't know the answer. I wish I did, because I think it would make 68 of the ward councillors very happy if we could solve that problem. But it is something that we need to be constantly looking at. But sorry?
Which is the one that wouldn't be happy?
No, it's at 68 me and 68 others. 68 one, John, 69. So we'd all be happy, wouldn't we? But it is difficult. But I take your point. I really take your point, but I don't know. We'd have to look and drill down and see how it does impact on our portfolio.
Will?
Eamon, just going back to the autumn budget report, point 10 on page 11 says £2 million of the extra 20.5 billion for the NHS. Is that figure not 2 billion? And just on the 20.5 billion figure more broadly, do we know how much of that we can expect to come to Kirklees?
First of all, welcome to Corporate Scrutiny Panel, and what a fantastic spot for your first panel meeting. Yes, it is a typo. It is 2 billion out of the 20.5 billion. It was just a test, but well done. Sorry, I've forgotten the second part of your question now. I was stunned.
Do we know how much of the 20.5 billion we can expect to come to Kirklees, and if not, when will we know?
At the moment, no. I think that will start to come to the fore as part of the, well, we get financial settlement, provisional financial settlement on 6th of December, and then concurrent to that, alongside that, there'll be government announcements around NHS funding going forward. I think there's also a more fundamental issue about who's going to pay for that 20.5 billion as well, how it's going to actually be financed nationally. So I think that's something that will be looked at certainly as part of the overall spending review sometime in 2019 in terms of A, it's how it's going to be funded, and B, where it's going to be allocated. So we've logged it for now. We know there's a commitment, there's a national government commitment to it, but the detail will follow, I think, as much as we can say at this point in time. Can I just briefly highlight some of the other issues that came up as part of the autumn budget? Some of them are sort of one-off announcements, like the extra disabled facilities grant announcement in 1819, which is welcome, and we'll factor that in accordingly. There was an announcement around 84 million over 5 years on specific children's social care improvements, but we're not anticipating that we're one of the 20 councils that have been cited for that. Mentioned previously about the reduction in business rates for businesses with a rateable value of under 51,000, and councils will get compensating grant for that. You mentioned quite rightly about the national pot, high street pot, and what can we do as a council to bid into that effectively. The national living wage uplift has been announced for 1920 at 4.9%. We'd factored 4.6% into our budget assumptions in the October report. So it's a marginal increase, but we'll reflect that accordingly. The significance of that is not just about potential impact on some of our own staff as part of the current pay award review, but as well about contracted services bought in, particularly social services, residential nursing and home care, where we honour the national living wage uplift as part of our contract uplift as well, because it's in everybody's interest to work with partners and have that capacity in the market, and then to try and attract people into those areas where they are struggling, I think, nationally across the whole care sector to retain staff and recruit new staff. So that's obviously an issue that we're looking at, but we need to be committed to honouring the pay award through contract uplifts. So that's already recognised. Just to note as well that as I said, the provisional financial settlement for local government is pending for 6th of December, which is 2.5 weeks probably earlier than it nationally comes out, or usually comes out in December. So that's welcome. That gives us a bit of an opportunity to finesse the proposals before we release them into the broader member domain and ultimately public domain. I think in the past there's been one or two really late announcements that caught us on the back foot a bit. The fact that it's coming early, I think, gives us more time to consider what the implications are. As to what might come out of it that's left field or different to our assumptions, I'm not sure. But not anticipating anything at this stage, being the prudent type. So anything that does come out that's above and beyond our expectations would be a bonus. The only comment I'd make around the announcement is that we are, as a Leeds City region, as part of a regional business rates pool, bidding for the 2019-20 business rates pilot, 75% pilot. We're part of a 100% pilot in 18-19. So we had assumed that there'd be a potential income gain to Kirklees of 2 million as part of the October budget report. So we are anticipating that we will be successful. If we're not successful, we'll have to obviously review that, because that's the £2 million that we'd expected to get that we might not get. There may be other mitigating factors, but that's just something to bear in mind as well as part of the 6th of December announcement. We will be told at that point whether or not we've been successful as part of the regional bid for 1920. Okay. Just finally, just to note that the budget consultation is out. Excuse me. The online budget simulator. I had a quick chat with colleagues this morning, and to date there's been 136 responses. I think it runs to the end of December. Last year we had 385 responses. Whether or not we'll get up to that or exceed it, I don't know yet, but we have had some interest to date. I think even the regionally the BBC were quite interested in it. I don't know if that's kind of hot off the press. Whether or not they'll do anything with it, yeah, I don't know. But certainly from conversations with comms officers, they quite liked the simulator model we've got on our website. Is the only comment I'd make. Whether they do anything with it is just, it's interesting to see what perceptions are about some of the things that were released out there. I thought that was quite a positive comment, really. Okay.
Before you carry on, I just want to say, Tony from the press is here, Examiner. Maybe he can help us out in trying to put this forward and trying to get more responses in. But ultimately, this is about individuals and their views.
Okay. Right, I'll conclude now. In terms of next steps, obviously we're not at that phase of finalising budget proposals. That will be brought forward in due course, and I think it's due to come back sometime in, can't remember in terms of the programme, is it January? Yeah, with a further update in terms of where we're at, both in terms of our in-year position and reflecting back on the financial settlement and then other key developments as we see fit. Is that okay? Thank you.
Okay. Just two things. I mean, this is for January. One is the issues related to, I know it seems to be a massive question mark as to what the Brexit's going to hold, but I keep saying this, but exactly what situation are we going to be? When I say a big question, because even the ones dealing with Brexit have no idea what's going to happen. So can we at least look into what the effects of the budget's going to be? And the second is the training that you undertook for us. We still have not seen any undertakers throughout the rest of the members. Maybe it's Julie, we can look at from the Overcrowd Scrutiny Management to pass that on, because that's one of the processes. It was one of the best presentation training that we had. It was insight, it was simple, but yet effective, and that's something I think all the members should be aware of and take advantage of that.
I believe it's been promoted to all members, but we can't force them to take it up. If it's not their day-to-day committee or portfolio, then they've got other training that they need to do. But we can revisit it and promote it again if Eamon's got the capacity to do it, though.
I mean, maybe it's through group meetings. It doesn't take long, and it could be incorporated. It just, when you understand the process and everything involved, and not everyone's an expert like yourself, Graham and John here, but, you know, ultimately it is essential for everyone.
No, I agree. We did say on the back of that summer training that we'd make a concerted attempt to roll it out broader. I think we said as well that we wanted to put some materials on the members' website as well to supplement that training. I'll hold my hand up. We haven't done it quite yet. It's on my list. And we will get round to it sooner rather than later. So we will have another refresh and review of how we can actually roll it out and what mechanisms we can use to support that.
Can I do a quick advert for corporate governance and audit? Most meetings we have some training following it, and all members are always invited, and it can be very interesting.
Right. Thank you, both of you. Graham, really appreciate it. I know it's a tough situation to be in, but keep smiling. Carl, I was wondering. Thank you. The next night, the Democracy Commission update. Carl, is it just yourself?
Yes, it is, Chair.
I'm just going to ask. I know John's going to be wearing two hats today because John's been involved in the working group.
Yes, he has.
And so I'll leave it to you, Carl.
Yeah, very briefly, Chair, thank you. I came to this panel, I think it was at the end of April this year, and almost sort of didn't have a whole lot to tell you other than to talk to you about the process that we'd gone through and the process we were about to embark on. So since that point in time, I think I said to you last time that a cross-party working group had been established by Council to begin to look at how best to take forward the recommendations of the Democracy Commission. The first meeting of that working group took place in March, and at that meeting, as I've referred to in the report, the principal task, well, firstly was to agree the terms of reference, but similarly to focus on what they believe were the priority recommendations that you wanted us to focus on in the sort of first stage of the work, that they're attached to Appendix 1 in the report. And hopefully what I've sought to do in the report is give you all a flavour of the projects since sort of March onwards that working group has set in play, commissioned, and I must say in fairness, that not just commissioned but are providing us a really strong leadership role on from a councillor perspective. So I think it's almost reassuring you that this is very much a sort of councillor-led piece of work. Officers are taking reports and recommendations about how we might begin to progress those recommendations, but very much informed by how members want to shape the work. I think that the challenge I've got, or certainly I found when I began to sort of write this report, I guess is to do justice to the significant pieces of work that working group's commissioned in a couple of paragraphs. And I suppose outside of this meeting, I would encourage members to look at the website that we've created to support this work, because there's significantly more detailed information about the respective projects that have been commissioned. And similarly, I would say that the working group have been very proactive in ensuring that all of their work has been in full public view. So all the information, every piece of information is on that website, and also only yesterday, every single meeting is webcast. We had another meeting yesterday at webcast. In terms of some of the priority recommendations that are within the report, some are internally facing about our culture and our approaches. So that's looking at how councillors and officers work together more effectively and we develop a different and better culture. The changing role of the councillor are now in a sort of a modern age and acknowledging that things have changed significantly. How do we revisit what that role looks like, but more importantly, how do we support it and attract, I guess, perhaps the next generation of councillors? A really, I suppose, more strategic piece of work around looking at how this council moving forward develops a different relationship with its citizens, and one that's based on engagement and dialogue and not more formal approaches to consultation. And that is a long-term piece of work, but the working group's commissioned a set of principles to take that forward, and we've piloted some work, certainly in Councillor Richards' ward in Golka, that sort of to test those engagement principles using a tool called the PLACE standard. We've also taken some proactive work to look at how we improve approaches to electoral registration. Some of those have been developed a more formal partnership with the university so that we link our registration with the student intake registration. So that's something we've just piloted this year, and are also looking at how do we begin to look at working more proactively with schools to undertake registration at the ages of 16. And that's a piece of work that's in its sort of early stages of development. But if you think about the sort of strategic level, it's in our interest as a democratic organisation to get as many people registered to vote, and actually looking at how we can use as many tools in our toolbox to make that happen was certainly something that the working group were keen to progress. There are other pieces of work around looking at the sort of what does democracy look like in a networked age, and the digital skills piece, some of which are for citizens, but some of which are for elected representatives. And relevant to today is beginning to commission work to look at how we open up our meetings and we make better virtue of media such as video and improve our democratic content. I guess so that situations like these are a bit more digestible to the citizens out there that you all represent. So in many respects, there's lots of pieces of work, and 2 more pieces of work were commissioned yesterday. I suppose for me, happy to talk about any of those pieces of work in detail, but I think I particularly welcome about moving forward how this panel would seek to have a role in not only scrutinising the work that John and colleagues are undertaking, but also what would be your role in some of the specific pieces of work that are emerging. And I think one last point, whilst the working group did focus on those recommendations, that's not to say that some of the recommendations that were in the report aren't just being progressed outside of that process. So one was around question times for group leaders. Well, we're approaching our 5th one of those. So, you know, there's some very practical examples where we've sought to just get on with some of those recommendations. But I think the ones that were of a higher level quite rightly required that cross-party working group leadership and steer. I'll pause for now because I know I've thrown a lot at the panel, and I don't know if John wants to add anything from a working group member perspective.
I'll just add a little bit. I think what I find really interesting is the way it's actually working in practice, because it is cross-party, and I think everybody's contributing. And we've had some really interesting discussions in those meetings. All of us have particular views which aren't always necessarily the same. We have different, interests and priorities and perspectives, but I think we're working quite well as a group so far, and I think I've been quite pleased how quickly things have started to happen as well. So I think that's a credit to Carl and his team, really, in terms of the progress that we are making. And as he said, we went through and looked at all of the recommendations from the Commission and identified those which were just simple, let's just get on and do it. And we mandated Carl and the team to just literally get on and do those. And there were some that were outside of our remit and responsibility, where the national issues were we've taken the view of, we've written to the relevant authorities or people to express our views, and we started to get some feedback on that. And then there was a range in the middle where really we need to do more detail to understand exactly how we could deliver on those commissions' findings, and that's the work that we're working through at the moment. And I think what I found really interesting, some of the work that I've been involved with a little more with Cathy, is around that interaction between councillors and officers, and what the relationship of a councillor is and how that's evolving and changing. And what I found really, really pleasing is how open and encouraging the officer corps been to it. We've had huge enthusiasm. I mean, I don't know whether any of you attended the sessions we had on what do we call it, put councillors at the heart of the organisation, where we held a couple of series, and they were really powerful. But I think also Cathy and I fronted up a piece of work where we brought a number of officers together, and we introduced it, and then we left, and we asked the officers to document what they thought the role of a councillor was, without any councillors present, to see, and then we're going to do a similar thing with some councillors, and then let's see what, how alike are these two effectively profiles, and does that tell us anything about perhaps some of the miscommunication that may be going on across the council, because they have different perceptions of what actually the role of a councillor is and how that's evolving. And I'm sure some members, when we show them both those, will go, well, actually, mine's over here, it's totally different again. So it's, how do we get those perspectives and try and come to a conclusion about what is the developing role of a councillor? And from that, then we can start to look at, well, are there some skill gaps and training needs, some support that's needed? Have we got the right technology in place in terms of, as things move more digitally? Do we hold the meetings in the right way and in the right places, which comes back to a point you were making about, some of our meetings can seem very structured and bureaucratic, and does that alienate the general public? So, is there a way that we can make that more effective? So there's a lot of stuff, good stuff going on, really, and I would encourage anybody to, find a way to get involved or to comment on some of the stuff that we're putting out there. I'm happy to answer any questions with Carl if anybody has any.
Before I open this to the panel, I just want to say thank you to both of you, because this is an update, and it's cross-party, like Carl said. It's extensive work that has been going on for a good number of months, well over a year. There are a number of things, and I think when it comes to looking at some of the subject, for example, like we want young people to be involved in the process, in taking part not just in the election, but Will, you're one of the youngest on the council, and that's an example. The under 16 or 16 eligible to vote. And there are certain issues that actually it is out of our control, and it might be seen by the likes of young people that we've got empty words, but the reality is a great deal is in the domain of the council, but some of the issues is outside, so it becomes an issue. John?
Can I just come back on that, and I'm sure Carl will recognise what I'm going to say now, because we've had this debate in the working group, and one of my concerns, if I'm honest, is there is a lot of work and effort being put into young people, but we're neglecting other groups that perhaps aren't as engaged. So I've been pushing and saying we need to look at people who are carers, people who are disabled, older people that might find it difficult to get to vote as well. So I fully take on board your point about how we engage young people, but we need to not be doing this to the exclusion of other groups that find it difficult to engage. And my worry at the moment is a lot of the work in the working party has been focused on that, possibly because it's easier to get to, because we can use the educational establishments to make those connections. But we need to not forget other groups that find it difficult to access democracy. And at the moment, we haven't done so much work in those as well.
I think the reason I'm highlighting young people is because if you can move from now to say 10 years, this group is the one that we need to tap into, and this is the one we'll be engaging and actually active, which looking for a job, dealing with the council issues and all the rest of it. And this is a group where it's almost kind of like a domain where do we go, what do we do? Because they're still in the learning process, so we giving them the right skills for them to move forward. When it comes to the rest, I totally agree. There are other groups, the elderly, trying to engage and how they engage with us and the rest of the services the council has to offer, because they deal with it on a daily basis. But when it comes to somebody, somebody leaving school and going further, they don't have that understanding, they don't have the life experience. So it's up to us to give them the right skill sets and engaging and making sure that they're part of the process. That's the whole issue. And I think when we're looking at the rights of vote at 16, we're talking of young people in such a way that we want to engage, but yet, I'm sorry, but you can't take that vote. And that was the issue. Hilary.
I think we've also to remember that you can't give children anything. You've got to get them to the point where they're ready to take on board things. And often, 16-year-olds are only on the very outside of things, and giving them some information might not help, but moving them towards it might.
Yeah, I was interested to hear what you both just said then about the councillors and officers' relationship and putting councillors at the heart of the organisation, as it's termed. And to me, this is, I think, a big area of concern. I think, and it was interesting to hear what you said now, and I don't know, maybe get your views on how long that's going to take to actually see some results from that. But, you know, for me, there's, without trying to be too negative, I think there's some fundamental problems here that, you know, we talked about officers and councillors talking together, but it seems to me that in the council, officers don't even appreciate that really councillors should be running the organisation. Even as fundamental as that. I think that there is, you know, and I don't want to be kind of, I don't want to sound like ridiculous, but, you know, how can it be acceptable that if a councillor contacts an officer that they just don't respond to them, or it takes them weeks and weeks to respond? You know, I can't think any other organisation where that would be acceptable. So I think there's some really, you know, not just people talking to each other and how can we all help each other. There's some fundamental things that are quite easy to do to say, if a councillor contacts you, you need to, at the very least, say to them, within a reasonable period, to say, you know, thanks, and I'm looking into it, and I'll come back to you at some point in the future. It's going to take me a while, which is totally reasonable. I don't think that, but I think there's a bit of a thing there. And I'm certainly from when this work started, I've not seen a real improvement. I mean, I've had some conversations recently around things where there's meetings that are discussing decisions being made in our ward, and when you ask officers, please can we have an invitation to that, we're told no. How can that be right? So, you know, I'm fine with the kind of sessions of working together, and I think that's absolutely important, but I think there's almost some fundamentals that need to be resolved before you get to that level of how everybody works together, because I think there's, in some parts, there's not engagement at all. And I know it's not everybody, and there's differences, and some people are doing it better than others, but I personally haven't seen a noticeable improvement in the last year or two. And when I speak to councillors who've been involved in, maybe only been around similar to me for a couple of years, 3 years, the biggest surprise I think they have in coming to the council is how little they get to hear and know about things that are going on, even in their own area. So I just have a concern about that, and I'm just concerned that the way that it's set up as putting it the council at the heart of our organisation is almost like a, this is what we'd like to do thing, as opposed to this is what is required. And I just have some concerns on that.
I'll take both issues. I think in terms of the young people, I think where the working group has got to is actually not just focusing on narrow courts. I think they're talking about engagement per se, and I would bring into view the more recent work that the working groups discussed around what are our core principles about engaging with people in this borough, particularly in the places where they live. And I think the approach we're taking absolutely begins to address that in its totality. I focused on the registration part of it because I think that's something that's in the gift of the council, and registering people to vote is just another part of that jigsaw, hopefully, of people having a democratic stake in the place. It doesn't necessarily mean it equates into voting. We are accepting of that, but you may over time come and hold me over the coals for if our registration levels fall and what am I doing about it. So there's an actually quite hard sort of accountability piece to that, but I do think there's an added value piece in terms of democracy. In terms of, I think it's really interesting, and Councillor Taylor might echo this, that the issues that you, and I am just going to say rightly acknowledge in terms of your personal experience as a councillor, have been echoed in the workshops that we've done not only with councillors, but conversely, the workshops that we've done with officers. And I think there are a number of actions that should begin to address the short-term expectations piece. Then I would equally add And I think this is where there's a longer timeline to this. I think we need to address the cultural part of officers and councillors working together as effective they can be. And we have quite a good narrative that explains how we've got to where we are, and we're not different to other councils. That doesn't make it right. But I think some of that is about creating clear expectations. Some of it's about giving permission and not gatekeeping. Some of it is actually, if we are talking about putting the council at the heart of things, what does putting council at the heart of their ward look like? And I think that's if I was to be honest, I think that is the biggest challenge, and where the council probably, for very plausible explanations, have backed away. And I think the evidence tells this. So this is not me just. I think councillors in their wards is the bit that is probably the. I'm not talking about direct physical support. I'm actually talking about responsiveness and support for you to engage with residents and meet those priorities. I think there's an acceptance that that's not perhaps what it used to, nor indeed what it should be. I do think there are some very practical things around the very basics around responsiveness and reaction to council. I don't disagree with you. And I think some of that is being picked up by some of the work that's now taking place in terms of how we respond to casework in its broadest terms in a much better way. I don't want to have that discussion here because we could go down a cul-de-sac. But I think everything you said was borne out by what both officers and councillors says, albeit from slightly different perspectives in the workshops that we conducted. And I think in the last session we had over 90 people in that chamber in there where I think your analysis is right, and I'm not seeking to say otherwise.
A couple of comments on that. I mean, I was at these workshops, and he's absolutely right. I think you mentioned permission, and that was one of the things that I picked up on in those sessions. That some of the more junior officers were saying they didn't feel as though they were given the permission to talk to councillors. So there were some more senior managers perhaps were stopping them from doing that engagement. I think one other point I'd pick up on were, I slightly disagree with you, James, around the roles. Our roles as councillors is to set the policy, but not do the detailed operational stuff, and that is the remit of officers. And sometimes some of this discrepancy is around councillors thinking that this is a piece of work that they should be involved with very low-level operational stuff, where if the resident has a problem, absolutely they should come to the council and council should help resolve it, but it's not for councillors to set that operational policy. So we just need to be careful around that. There's also, I think, when you look at it, what we've tried to do is gather some stories, so examples of good practice and examples of poor practice. And what we also get from some officers we picked up was some officers are a little scared of councillors, and they've had some bad experiences in the past where either they've had a poor reaction from a councillor, or they've tried to help a councillor and it's blown up in their faces, and they haven't felt supported. So there's some onus on us as well to be mindful, and I always find with officers, if I treat them the way I want them to treat me, I generally get a good outcome from it. So there's a little bit around that. And the other thing I would say is, what certainly I've been doing, is I've been using this term, putting councillors at the heart of the organisation, to my advantage when I see things where I don't believe they are. So, for example, nobody would be surprised here to hear me talk about libraries, because I do at every opportunity. But when the library consultation was done, was that last year now? Beginning of this year. They were doing a consultation with libraries, but they weren't engaging councillors. So I was having none of this. So I just went straight to Jackie and said, what happened to putting councillors at the heart of this organisation? So if you're doing a consultation on libraries, why aren't you consulting councillors? And she put it right. So use it to your advantage if you're seeing things where... And if you are experiencing problems with officers, particular officers or particular parts of the council, either talk to your business manager or a more senior councillor, or go and talk to a senior officer and explain what the problem is, and they'll help you. And it may be that individual is under some pressure, time pressure, workloads or something, it may be that that individual needs a bit of advice about how to engage with councillors, but unless we provide the feedback, things will never change. And Carl's absolutely right about a lot of this is to do with culture. And as we all know, whenever you're trying to change a culture in an organisation, it takes an awful long time. And you have to be resilient and keep reminding people of what we're trying to achieve. So I think you're dead right in some of the concerns you're raising. It's just about how we then feed that back into the right officers to help get you some support in terms of fixing those.
Thank you, Carl and John. I understand where you come from. This is an issue not just in the council when it comes to the culture. It happens throughout, especially the NHS, and kind of over the years I've seen it how, you know, some people are not willing to change and difficult to kind of even take new ideas on. But quite a simple idea is about the expectations. If a member of public is writing a letter or in these days sending an email, it should be that I think 14 days is a reasonable response time. Even, I mean, the initial responses will get back to you. And I think what James is saying, I think we've all experienced this one way or the other. When we send information across, one, it gets lost in the abyss. We don't get a response. And that is, and I make it clear, that's not with every single officer. That's a handful of officers. Majority of the officers in the council, immense respect and the work that they do, it's just a handful that it gets lost in the abyss and never to be seen again. Two, there is that confidence, and I understand where John's coming from in terms of the experience they've been burnt in the past with some of the experiences they've had with some of the councillors, but it should be a set standard where if somebody's sending an email, especially a councillor, or responding, and if they're saying we'll respond to that when we conclude or when we've done the investigation, they should come back, not wait 6 months, even a year, and then it's off the radar. And something I've used in the past, and I will continue using, councillors in particular and the senior management, the amount of information we deal with, the data, be it email, hard copies, or the rest of it, it's almost like if you blink, you'll miss. That's how much information we have to deal with. So when it comes to individual officers dealing with certain departments, they're dealing with that scope. And that scope should be that if a councillor is asking for that information, it's not for their simple random questions, it's dealing with a constituent or an issue that they've got that they need answers to. And that is the issue. It's about setting standards. And I appreciate both of you. I think one of the recommendations could be that how we set standards for responding to councillors.
If I can take that one. Certainly that point about responsiveness has been recognised and has been picked up, and it's recognised right at the very top of the organisation in terms of Jackie and the strategic directors. They are looking at ways in which we can perhaps get to a position where we have ward officers. So we have somebody that is, you know, your go-to person for your ward that will deal and understand some issues. One of the things that we picked up when we were talking to officers is their response to this issue around, I don't know what's going on, or things are happening and I don't know, is they have a variety of, they want to send you lots of emails, they want to send you newsletters, they want you to look at websites, and we were going, hold on a second, you know, there's a danger here of every single part of the council sending lots of information to all of the councillors, and then you won't be able to see the wood for the trees. So part of it is working through about what is it we need to know, and that's the challenge. How do we get to know the stuff we need to know without being inundated with a whole load of information that may or may not be relevant to us, or may or may not impact on the responses we're getting from our residents? So and that's what we're currently wrestling with in terms of how do we get that right. In terms of responsiveness, I think it's much as we're asking officers to understand the role of a councillor and to help us redefine the role of the councillor, there's an onus on us to try and understand the role of an officer. And officers aren't sat in their ivory towers waiting for emails to come in from councillors to respond to. And certainly if you haven't, I'd strongly recommend trying to get the opportunity to spend a day with an officer in an area that you're interested in. I'm sure we can facilitate it. And you can see the range of things that they're involved with, and it helps get a better understanding of why sometimes you're not getting the response as quickly as you would like or in the way that you would like when you see the range of issues that that individual is perhaps dealing with. Because a lot of this is about communication and us both understanding each other's role, each other's time pressures, each other's priorities, and then working together on how we solve these. And I think it is an invaluable piece of work to do, is to spend some time sat alongside an officer in an area that's quite responsive to you. You know, dependent on your ward, it may be different. You know, in my patch we've got lots of roads, so it might be highways. You know, in a more urban area, it might be schools or school places or adult social care, or whatever it may be. Whatever's an issue that you tend to get quite a lot of in your patch, go spend a day with them. Be invaluable. You'll learn an awful lot, and you'll build those relationships.
Just to echo Councillor Taylor's point, I think one of the emerging sort of pieces of work from the research that we've done is very much about creating opportunities to develop that shared understanding, and some of that doesn't have to be a major project, doesn't have to be a big shadowing exercise. I think it's and officers have got an important role in this, and it was quite interesting in the conversations that we have. I mean, why wouldn't you involve ward councillors in the ways which might be changing how you deliver services in an area? Why would you not engage with them when you've got some funding opportunities that are for that? And it wasn't. I don't think at any point there was a lack of willingness to do it. I think there's sometimes, well, I don't know where to start, and I know that sounds very strange, but I think the context of this is really important. Over a relatively short period of time, we have lost a number of experienced and adept officers who've worked effectively with councillors for years, and I think we have a responsibility from an officer perspective to equip all officers as best we can, partly to understand that we work in a political and democratic organisation, but also then bringing to life what that means. And what that means in a highways context will be different to what it means in a finance context. But I think that's why the sort of the whole point about putting council at the heart of what we do. And John alluded to it. It's about telling stories about what that looks like, and very importantly, what does good look like. And we've started that work, and hopefully it's coming into view in terms of the information that we're sharing. But I do wholly take on point that some very practical steps that are around responsiveness and service delivery in its broadest terms that do need to be picked up.
Thanks, Carl. One of the areas we're looking at is how do we actually take this work forward? Not necessarily the overview, but how do we monitor this? Now, is there any recommendation? I'll let you think for that before we kind of conclude on this one. One of the areas that's been mentioned, 2 points, is how do officers actually relay information back or set standards in that respect? And the second one is what John mentioned, is about possibly using the media. And if anybody wants to take that opportunity to spend a day in the life of an officer and utilising, like many, not just for the councillors, but for the public to actually understand what an officer does, what a councillor does. So each one has that understanding and utilising the media. Now, one question I've got is, a lot of these recommendations that we have, is there cost implication? And it's not a case of how much is going to cost us. One example that I'm trying to look into that I've seen is the webcast. That goes out. In terms of the quality and the standard that we have right now, it's almost, if you ask somebody going back to the dial-up connection of the internet age to using 4G now, it's almost like, are you kidding me? It's that kind of thing. So time moves on, technology is moving on. Some of the system that we use in here and the quality of what people see, it's very, very difficult. Now, Will, could you give us an insight? And I'm not picking on you on that because you're a new councillor. You're a new councillor. I'm sure you've gone on the website, on the webcast. How effective do you find getting that information if you want to see what's going on in one of the meetings which is broadcast out? And how do you feel?
I did find it more difficult than I expected it would be, to be honest, and I did think the quality of the webcasts was a little bit dated. So I think there's definitely something we could do to make that feel a bit more modern and accessible for residents. Yeah.
But before we bring you, John, I think it's more of that and how interactive we need to be. In some cases, there are a lot of companies out there, or I'm not seeing councils, where you can actually interact, whether it's on Twitter or social media, and they can put questions. Ours is just bland. So, John and...
So just to the first point about the webcast, and I don't know whether I'm speaking out of turn or not, but one of the other things I attend is group leaders meetings and with the chief executive, and Jackie is looking at it. So in terms of the whole system, because we recognise it's dated, so that's already been started. There's already some work. So just to reassure you that it's not being ignored by the council, it's already underway. Just in terms of understanding of roles around councillors and officers, what also the team have been doing is they've been doing little bite-sized videos of councillors and officers and putting them alongside each other. Because I know they videoed me at one point after, I think one of these sessions actually, I got kept behind, videoed, and then, you know, so they asked me a number of questions, and I think it's Rachel that's with me, and asked Rachel the same questions, and you're getting those different viewpoints of a councillor and an officer. They've also done some work with new councillors as well, so interviewing those and putting some of that available. We do have a Twitter feed, because I follow it, and most of our meetings, there is stuff going out on Twitter as a result of that, and I think somebody might be videoing bits of it and things. It usually does. So, you know, that we are starting to try and stretch into that more digital space, but we recognise there's an awful long way to go.
I think a number of points. I think there's two parts at the very least to this answer. I think, because one of the Commission's recommendations was, and I might get it wrong, to utilise the full capability of our webcasting technologies. The point being to enhance. I'm good at. Before I can name all the recommendations. The point being, we have the capability in terms of the actual webcasting, which is software, but we are limited, and you've absolutely hit the nail on the head, by the hardware, which is ageing, and it is a fact. So the hardware in this chamber, to a degree, limits quality, audio quality, and that's a capital investment conversation around town halls. That's one that I don't own or wouldn't have a view on, but there would be a cost. What I would say is, taking Councillor Taylor's point about the work we've tried to do with that working group, and this is about culture change around meetings and how we do them differently and better, is we seek to webcast, we use the mobile kit, we seek to curate the meetings using social media, and there is facility, if anybody is minded, to use that equipment to bring questions into the environment. So the capability exists. I think it's about the preparedness of the organisation to embrace that or not, but particularly in this space, to embrace it effectively would involve some capital spend.
Yeah, I mean, not going into detail into this, and before I've got Philip, other companies out there, i.e. banks, have embraced the new technology and how they're developing it, and it's how we embrace that. You know, some of the, it's almost like the going on from online banking to using apps, where the branches are shutting down because, you know, they don't have the footfall going through, whereas we interact. There's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of stuff, it's ongoing. I mean, I'd see the whole system we've got probably in a museum in the next couple of years, the way things are. It's how we interact and genuinely kind of not just have a discussion on this, but actually engage. Because I think, John, you mentioned about there are certain groups, the elderly, others who kind of we need to engage more as well. But there are people who actually sat there waiting to have a question or something. How do they interact? This is probably the medium where in each meeting, in years to come or a couple of years to come, they can interact instantly. And that's the question about how we all work as a network kind of thing.
I'll just quickly come back on that. You mentioned banking, and of course that's my background, and program and system development is my background as well. And my experience when I joined the council was that we were probably 10 to 12 years behind, where banks were in terms of their digital development. We are trying to speed up, but there's a recognition that there's still a lot more work to do in that space. And you're absolutely right. But, digital and using digital processes and software and everything is a journey. You can't jump from nothing to the latest state-of-the-art technology, because you need to have the knowledge and understanding. And I think we are moving along that route. Yes, we'd love to get there more quickly, but these things do take time. And I think Carl's nailed it on the head in terms of the equipment in this room is not really fit for purpose, and there's a recognition of that. So I think we just need to follow that one through, I think.
I'm sort of encouraged by the work you're doing on engagement between officers and members. But there's a triangular relationship here, and that's members of the public. And the public directly contact officers in appropriate circumstances, and they directly contact councillors. And I think that needs to be brought in. And I think if you could find a way of completing that triangle, you may well get better registration for the electoral register as well.
Couldn't agree with you more, and I think having dived into the Office of Councillor discussion, we missed the most important ingredient, but I want to reassure that ingredient's not missing in this work. So I think that the piece around, because we've been talking a lot, if we'd have been sat here a number of years ago, we wouldn't have been talking about engagement. So we'd have been talking about webcasting, for example. Webcasting was broadcasting. It still is broadcasting. There isn't a dialogue. What we're talking about is actually how do you take technology and use it as a mechanism to have engagement, and I think that is the next step. Engagement with citizens, all citizens, and I think that the work that this working group has agreed, and it's beginning to come into view. We've certainly done some work in Councillor Richards' ward, and we're going to do some work in Councillor Taylor's and Councillor Walker's ward around looking at different ways of engaging with people about the places in which they live, using a different approach and a different tool, online and offline. I think that's the really exciting space that the council's moving into, and I think for a borough as large and complex as Kirklees, it has to be outwards from communities and upwards as opposed to top down. And I think you're totally right. You hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. If this report's been about anything, it's been principally about the relationship between officers, councillors, and the citizens of Kirklees.
Just to reassure you, Philip, when I talked about developing what is the role of a councillor in the actual narrative, it makes the point that we've done that work with officers. Further sessions will take place with citizens and councillors, so it won't be just councillors that we will sit down with the citizens as well. My one worry bead around citizens is how we get a representative sample, because it tends to be self-selecting, and then it doesn't tend to be reflective of the general public, because most of the general public don't want to know about councils until their bin's missed. So we just have to be careful about we don't have some highly active, engaged citizens and think they're representative of the entire population.
Just thinking that's another cultural change which is going to take longer to engender with the general public, because it is, why my bin not been emptied today? Well, actually, my bin was emptied early today. But and it's only when it's a problem. But I think, you know, sometimes that's because people are switched off, because they don't always have that confidence that they can speak to somebody.
And just what you've said, John, about the banks is very good, but I think we're not realising that the banks are there to generate profit, and one of the ways they do it is by keeping up to date ahead of the technology for their customers. We're in the opposite side, that we don't generate any income. We have to spend income extremely carefully, and so we can't always keep as high up as we'd hope to with the tech.
I think what you find, Hilary, is in the banks, it's not so much they're trying to keep ahead, they're actually trying to keep up with the public. So actually what you find is, and I've said this in meetings before and got into trouble because I said under 50, but generally in terms of demographics, the younger people are, the more addicted they are to their phones, as James has proved. And there is an expectation that they can do everything digitally. And actually, banks are running to catch up with people because they don't they don't actually have to pick up a phone and talk to somebody. My God, you know, that's antiquated.
Because their customer is their generator of income.
No, they're doing that because they want to retain their customer, yes. Just as we want our citizens to get the best possible response from us. I don't think it's any different in that respect. Because actually in banks' terms, if they don't satisfy the customer will walk. Our customers can't exactly walk, but what they might do is vote us out.
Before I bring Will and James in, I understand where Hilary is coming from, but I think if I go back 18 years ago when I first got onto the council, we had almost a cabinet full of data agendas going out on a daily, weekly basis. Now, Julie's here, if you remember, it was a case of purging every year, because if you didn't, you didn't know where to stick this, because it was a pile that kind of grew. They introduced laptops, computers, PCs. It kind of reduced the burden. 18 years later, I mean, we use the mobile phones to activate, check our emails, and we're literally on the go. Things move, and technology makes it easier. I think the key, what you mentioned, both of you mentioned, and Carl, is how do you get that balance right? It's almost like every couple of years the technology changes, or every 12 months the technology changes, and how do we keep up to it? This system's been up, well over 10 years or something, maybe more. Now, it seems to be outdated. So it's a case of trying to get that balance. But I think the more we move on, you realise it reduces the cost on traditional methods of engaging. The number of things we've done as a council, and others are taking it on board. We've even selling the idea, if you remember, going in, walking around the contact points, customer service centres. Well, we're actually now selling our technology to other council and develop something which happened in-house. So there's a lot of things have changed. I completely understand from Hilary's point as well. Will?
This links into what John was saying and what we've been saying about engaging directly with citizens. One of the things that I benefited from, not just electorally, but since I've become a councillor, is having an active social media presence. I have a Facebook page that I put quite a bit of effort into maintaining, and that's continued since my election to receive messages with casework inquiries, just general sort of policy inquiries. So I think it's not just down to the council, there's things we as members can do to make ourselves as open through the means that people use already themselves. And just the point, it's not just young people that contact me through Facebook. Actually, the majority of people that contact me through social media are middle-aged and older people. No offence to anyone who self-identifies as middle-aged or older. But there's a massive opportunity for us as elected members, and when it comes to election time, to make people feel like we really are there for them.
Yeah, in agreement there. So I think one of the things where I think as Philip was saying, one of the really important things that I think we're not 100% getting right yet is this thing about communities doing things for themselves and not being done to. And so I agree we have to have that engagement with residents, but I think as a starting point, if you get that engagement with councillors, then that leads from there. Because it's things like I've had a number of things in the last couple of months where the council is going off and trying to do something which is totally good, a good idea, but without proper consultation with the community, they're missing a fact. So things like setting up a youth project on the same night there's already a youth project at the same building. You know, do you know what I mean? Or a neighbour. So that type of thing, you know, whereas had that conversation with us, I could have put them in contact with the other groups that were doing that sort of thing and they could have done something together. So it's those types of things. I think if it comes to us first, we can then help with that engagement.
I think it's really fascinating, just reflecting on these conversations about all of these ingredients. They're not separate, are they? They absolutely are co-joined. And I taking the example of the pilot work that we did around the place standard in Councillor Richards' ward, the absolute starting point before we did anything was we sat down with the ward councillors. Well, because why wouldn't you? So we're going to do some engagement. It's going to be for a 2 weeks period. We've got limited resources. How best do you start this task to make sure that it's effective? Well, you tap into to 3 representatives who understand the patch in detail, the networks, the people, the places, and you make an absolute virtue of it. Now, going back to putting council at the heart of the organisation, and my point about actually putting council at the heart of their wards, for me, why wouldn't you do that? Because from an officer perspective, it's gold dust, you know. And I think that is the cultural change that we've got to unpick. I think organisationally, that actually it's not how do I, it's why wouldn't I? And I think that's really good in some places, and this conversation has demonstrated it's less good in others. I think taking Councillor Simpson's point, absolutely right. I mean, that's why when the Commission did its original work, it really took a lot of time looking at what does it take to be an elected representative in a network society. By networks, network online, network offline. But similarly, what does that mean from a citizen's perspective in terms of their expectations of you as representatives and as us as officers? And that whole narrative has changed in, you know, a 10-year period. I've been around a long time and worked closely with and close to councillors, and the expectations that legitimately your citizens place on you in a digital age, the expectations might be the same, but there's certainly the mechanism, tools by which they are there accessing and expecting you to operate are different. So going back to why is the role important and being clear what the role is, we need to understand that in a modern age, not just perhaps how it was before. So your discussion has wholly shown how these things interlink together, which has been reassuring in itself.
Seems we want to carry on with that. Can we look into how we're going to take this forward? And one of the issues we discussed was how we undertake the work, life of an officer. I mean, do we do that as a panel individually, or do we do that as an officer and then in council? I mean, how would that work?
We, from an officer perspective, we will put the mechanisms in place whereby if there's a desire from members of this panel to do some shared working with the officers in a service, do some shadowing, we will join that up. That's not a problem at all, and we've done that in the past. So I know you shadow. I don't know if you shadow. Yeah, both ways. Yeah.
And the second question is, how do we move forward in this? Do we need a regular update, or is just simply the work which kind of it gets undertaken or get feedbacks? Panel members decide.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, obviously we don't want to duplicate what the working group's doing on it anyway, but I think what would be helpful for us, I think we've got an update here, but I think what's come out of this is what we'd like to probably see and be able to scrutinise is some of the tangible results that we get and the benefits that we get. And I know some of this is kind of hard to do sort of empirically, but I think it'd be good to see when we have some actual outcomes to present, to say these are actually the changes that we've made, these are the impacts it's had. I think that would be something that we could look at and bring another lens to. I think that would be what I would suggest.
Philip?
On that basis, going back to your registering students, for example, you can give us back feedback perhaps on the percentage of students that are registered on the electoral roll.
Yeah,
I mean, I suppose we can provide metrics, and I think we did when I came in April. I think I sort of did a number of pieces of metrics of things that we'd be. So I think there's metrics. I think there's some impact pieces. I wholly agree with you, and I think partly which we never got a chance to do, I suppose, is to share some of the things that we've been trying to describe. So you know, there's a number of products and things that we've done, video narratives, case studies, that they all exist, but I didn't bring them into view today because, you know, I wanted to try and get a sense. And I suppose what I would ask, I mean, I've brought to you all the priority recommendations and where we're at with them. I suppose, do you want outcomes and impacts and metrics around all of those, or do you want to focus down on particular ones? I don't mind. I suppose it's just getting a sense of when I come back next time, what are you expecting or wanting?
There's a difficult one, this, because apart from metrics, there are to measure how well you've progressed. I guess to feedback where you're having difficulties in progressing a particular area, perhaps in the triangular engagement between councillors, officers and public, if you get onto that level, and then what barriers you're finding to that.
I think just to add on to that as well, it's about the work that which is undertaken. There's a great deal of work which is currently undertaken. Looking at one of them, putting the councillors at heart, and I would put / officers at the heart, because it's kind of a two-way stream in there. So some of the work that probably can move forward with that, how that can be fed back, and look at that side of it. One of the things we've not looked at, we've gone through quite a lot of it, is how do we improve electoral registration? And the other aspect of that is how do you actually, when it comes to people coming out, I know there's been a number of options using ID cards or some kind of IDs where, you know, pilot projects and various other stuff which is going on at the moment. One of the things is how can we use that, improving the process that they can use, take advantage of the IT and do it online. And the second aspect is how do they actually, other countries do it, America, where you can do it online. How do we, still fitting within the legal parameters of it, to kind of...
I think there's really two important distinctions. One is about registration. One is about registration translated into voting. Registration, from a council perspective, we rightly have some influence on that because we maintain the register and we undertake the canvass through the register. To reassure you as a panel, we seek to use within the parameters of the law all the technology and flexible approaches that we're able to encourage registration, and the outreach work that we do, which was a specific recommendation from the Commission, we continue and we widen that outreach work. So I think there's partly registration, and then there's voting. In the Commission's work, there were a whole set of factors considered, and there's research being done by Electoral Commission, which I won't go into in too much detail. But there are a number of things that govern registration being translated into voting. The most important one, and really good this, officer, I've got no control over it, is a competitive field of candidates from which to choose. The research says that. So competitive candidates where it's known what those candidates are about, and so that's the main idea. And then there's the extent to which different things like voting in different places, voting online, etc., all of which require legislative change, have had a positive effect on increasing voting. And the outcomes of those pilots that they did about 8-9 years ago were mixed, to the point where no government has been minded to put in place any legislative change to change our voting system. It was a recommendation that the Commission made that national government should, I'm paraphrasing again, should consider all opportunities to encourage voting. And some of those might be about accessibility, ease of voting, etc. But all of which would require a change to how we do things in this country currently. So that bundle of stuff, not in our gift. Registration, we have more opportunity to influence the number of people on the register. We have no guarantee. I can't guarantee to you that then that translates into voters and turnout.
So I was just going to say, what might be useful, Carl, next time is to just bring a short report about what electoral services do to encourage registration. Because there's a whole host of things they already do, and probably that's not very visible to members. So it might be useful to actually understand, how they do go about trying to canvass and encourage registration, not just through the university and schools, but right the way across the piece.
And I think that's a good idea to talk to the elections office, but you do that as a single piece of work. I think James made an important point earlier on is don't want to duplicate the work that the panels, you've already got a cross-party panel doing lots of scrutinising of this process and leading this process. So the important question for this group is to just think, well, what else can we add to that? What added value can we bring to that process? But this is a process that has been allocated council resources. There are officers and members investing a lot of time and of course then investing money on behalf of the council. So do we need to see a proper programme with deadlines and targets, and how do we measure what difference is it making? It's all that so what difference is all this making? And that's what we're not really getting to grips with yet, I don't think.
I think you're absolutely right, and we are now we've got a series of projects off the blocks, and I didn't bring you all the mandates, but a lot of the mandates that officers were charged with filling out was being clear about how impact will be demonstrated. Within the next quarter, I am confident that we will be reporting on progress on a programme management basis. So targets, what's on track, what's not, what's deliverable, what are the issues. So that will be in place, and Councillor Taylor's working group will more routinely be getting that. We were waiting to a point where we got some work that would, I suppose, moving through the system before we started doing that absolutely hard measurement and programme reporting. But you're absolutely right, Councillor Turner. If you were asking what, over and above what you're particularly interested in within the programme, my view would be you should legitimately be expecting me to report to you on the delivery of that programme against intended outcomes, the impact it's delivering, and what are the issues and risks associated. And I think the infrastructure is now almost in place for me to allow to begin to do that. If that's helpful, that's what. And then you can pick up on an exception basis where you want to dive in or otherwise.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
And final recommendation when it comes to the electoral side of it, and that fits in nicely. The councillors get the marked register. Oh, sorry, not the marked register, the actual register when it's updated. They get two options, the paper copy or the electronic. Now, can I suggest that when it comes to the paper copy, that's their choice. But to add, if they want both the electronic, to get that as well, because when it comes to it, all it is a simple email. It's on a data. It's not going to cost a great deal. For the simple reason is some councillors do want to add it onto the phone, so when they're flicking through or checking details to verify it's there for that purpose, because you're not likely to carry the full register with you all the time. And I've had a number of cases where you need to clarify something, is that person at that address, or, just to make sure they say who they are. So by checking quickly on the phone, it makes it easier. So that option is available. Yeah, brilliant. Well, I mean, we recently filled the forms in, and it was asking which format do you want. Yeah. Yeah, can we have both? Yeah. And actually,
was there a GDPR issue about having the paper copy and going about in public with it?
I don't know the reasons, but what I am absolutely confident is my electoral colleagues are all over GDPR. They're absolutely, because we have to be, quite rightly. I'm wholly confident that we are GDPR compliant in the electoral function.
Carl, John, both of you, thank you very much. And we'll catch the rest of it in the chair's briefing and to add what we need to. Can we go on to the next item, 6, work programme? That's on page 51 and 54. Okay. We need to add some training into, I think, Julie, do you want to just go into that? This is about the commercialisation aspect.
Yeah, I know it's making slow progress, but this is a pre-scrutiny item that I think you committed to taking forward this year. And so I think a great starting point would be some training from the LGA about what commercialisation is and what's happening around the country, the pros and cons of it. So I've asked Elena to try and get that date in the diaries for everyone.
Brilliant. Are we happy with the rest of the details?
There was one other thing.
Yeah.
I know the land letting policy was also something that was on the long list of issues, and I think that's a simple piece of work because I think you're pushing on an open door there. I think it would be helpful to have a discussion with officers about the land letting policy, and just so it's to bounce ideas around it, how the policy can be adapted to support community organisations. So I think if you could fit that in somewhere, it would be really helpful.
I will pick that up. And just to make a point that it is Elena's last meeting, we are sadly going to lose her. So I will get to that point at the end. But we will catch, before she leaves, we will catch up on some of the issues. Is the rest of the programme any changes? And like always, as I say, if there's anything that we need to add, just as Julie mentioned, we can add that on as well. Are we okay? The future meeting, the next one's 17th of January, 2019. Most likely we're going to see all of each other, but have a wonderful Christmas and a New Year. And I just want to say thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Elena's been the backbone in terms of some of the stuff that we've done, and genuinely we're going to sadly miss. So if you want to officially note that by Elena. So I'll catch up on who we're going to get as admin support in the coming weeks, but really appreciate for what the work Elena's done, not just on this panel, but throughout the department that she's been working for. She will be moving to another department within the council, sadly not working with us. So thank you very much. I formally close the meeting.